Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Chicago Cubs March to October. The regular season is over, and we've definitely made the playoffs. We've made it by far. Our first round opponent is the Padres. They won the wild card game to get here. But before we actually get into playoff action, today's episode is going to be a recap of the regular season. If you're somebody who has watched my March to Octobers in the past, you've probably come across this dreaded stat recap episode. And the reason I say dreaded isn't because I don't like it, I love it. But I think the fact that I love looking back at the stats from the season makes it bad because it ends up going way too long because I get way too into it. So if you're someone who enjoys looking back at the season of fictional stats on a video game, you're gonna like this episode because we go pretty in depth looking at the stats of my players. If you don't find that fun, if you think that's kind of a waste of the next half hour or so, I honestly completely understand. Just come back for the next one where we start the playoffs. But with that being said, let's start things off. Let's look at the records around the league. We finished with a record of 112-50, which has to be one of the better seasons of all time. But I was looking on like lists and stuff to try and figure out where we ranked. I don't know if I was looking in the wrong spot or what, but I feel like I couldn't find like a good list that just ranked single seasons by winning percentage. But from what I did find, it seems like there's plenty of teams with an over 700 winning percentage. We didn't quite get there, so we're probably not in the conversation for like the best team of all time. But dang, dude, we're pretty close. Just a couple more wins here and there, and we would have been over 700. The Pirates, on the other hand, 43-119. That has to be the worst I've ever seen in a March to October. Now, they were in jeopardy. I did find a good list for this one. They were in jeopardy of having the worst season in the modern era, meaning 1900 and beyond. For a while there, their winning percentage was down at, what was it, like 211-ish? That would have, if they would have kept on that pace and finished with a winning percentage of under 235, they would have been the worst team in the modern era. Obviously the worst team ever. We all know the story. The 1899 Cleveland Spiders, they went 20-134 for a 130 winning percentage. So I don't think the Pirates were really challenging for that spot at any point. They weren't quite that bad. But from this list that I can find, this record ties them with the 2003 Detroit Tigers to be the 6th worst team of the modern era. So it's kind of funny that we have, you know, one of the best records of all time. You know, it's up there, even though I don't know exactly how high up it is, while also having simultaneously one of the worst records of all time in the same division. But what did the other divisions do? We have the NL East. The Mets won it by a pretty comfortable margin, actually. You had the Braves taking a wild card spot at 89-73. The Phillies also had a good year. They had the same record as the Cardinals. Over to the NL West, the Dodgers had the second best record, 102-60. The Padres made it to the wild card game with a 90-73 record. The Giants had a really good season, but they didn't make it. And actually, that adds up to 163, right? So they had to play. Who would they have played a game 163 against? Oh, it was probably just the Padres. That makes sense. Man, so hang on. That's interesting, because that would mean at the end of 162, the Giants and the Padres were 89-73, but so were the Braves, and it seems like the Braves didn't have to play game 163. I don't know how that makes sense. I remember, oh my gosh, I remember this last season, Jeff Passan tweeting out all sorts of scenarios for what the heck was going to happen in the AL with that wild card situation. I don't remember what it took to do a 3-team tiebreaker, but part of me wonders if this game isn't, you know, quite that in depth, and maybe it was just based on division. So like, since the Braves were in a different division, they were good, they kind of had it locked up no matter what. But then since the Padres and Giants were battling for the same spot in the same division, maybe they had to play. I don't know, but it's interesting. I don't think I've seen that before. Oh man, I didn't even realize the Padres have the #1 team ranking. It's usually always the Dodgers. So yeah, and then the Cardinals, they completely missed it. I glossed over that, but I wonder if that last series we played against them kind of did it. I wonder if they were in the hunt, and then since we beat them in 3 games in a row, and they lost 4 games in a row, maybe we're the ones that knocked them out, which is pretty satisfying. But then, all right, on to the AL, the Yankees. Wow, they won their division. They won that tough AL East with a record that wouldn't have even gotten them into the playoffs in the NL. 88-74 wouldn't have made the wild card game. That's crazy. So they win their division with that record. Wow, this actually turned out to be a pretty bad division. The Rays and the Jays with losing records. The Red Sox barely over 500. Over to the Central, the Twins. That was the other team that was pretty much the whole season the best team in the league until they must have hit a rough patch and we got hot and we took that from them. But they were on pace to have like the best season of all time. So they fell apart a little bit. They came back down to earth. But man, this is crazy too. They did that in a seemingly competitive division. You had both wild card spots coming from this division, and Cleveland was over 500 in 4th place. Then finally the AL West, the Astros won it like usual. The Angels actually had a winning record though, good for them. So yeah, interesting, some kind of interesting results in the standings here to end the season. The AL East being weird and not good. The Central being really good. That 3-team tie seemingly in the NL wild card. However, that ended up working itself out. I don't know. But that, lets us look at the playoff picture here and how it shaped up so far. So it was the Padres versus Atlanta in the wild card game. Padres won, so they face us. The White Sox beat the Royals over in that wild card game, so they take on the Twins. The Royals, though, hang on, I didn't even take a second to stop and think about that, but the Royals made the playoffs. This is the 2021 season, guys. The Royals? Really? All right, well, let's go in and dive into our stats here. Once we cross that threshold into the playoffs, it won't show the stats on this screen, so we gotta go player by player, pressing triangle, looking at their player card, analyzing their stats that way. So I guess we'll just start off at the, well, actually, no, this is what we'll start with. Since I forgot to do it earlier in the year, and also because when somebody's like hot or cold, those icons show up instead of these all-star icons. But now that there's no hot and cold icons, we can see who our all-stars were. So Story was an all-star, but we didn't even get him until after the all-star game. But then from our team, our guys, Bryant, Happ, and Baez were all all-stars. And then on the pitching side, none of our bullpen was all-stars. None of our other starters were all-stars, but Kyle Hendricks was. All right, so now let's start at the top of our order. Trea Turner, our final trade we made at the end of the season, or at the end of the trade deadline. He went up a pretty good amount this season. He realized that A potential, getting up to a 90 overall. That contact versus lefties going up to a 98, almost maximum. And then looking at his stats, what a year. And I don't have like the side-by-side, I don't have the screenshot of what his stats were when we traded for him, but I remember that he had 9 homers. And I said I wasn't too worried about that because a guy like Trea Turner, you don't really need him to hit homers to be good. But dude came to our team and hit homers. I mean, I know 9 in 2 months isn't like super impressive, but he did double his home run total in less than half the year spent with us. So he finished with 18, but then 41 doubles, dude. That's the most in his career, with also 7 triples, drew a ton of walks, 70 walks. So he's getting on base. He's putting up the slugging numbers, but then 38 stolen bases. I wish it didn't come with 15 caught stealings, but what are you gonna do, man? You can't tell him not to steal bases. Scrolling over to WAR, put up a 4.7 wins above replacement, which is the best he's ever had. So technically, this is the best season of Trea Turner's career. I mean, if the 2020 season was a full season, that probably would have been it. But still, we can say that, the season he had with us was his best ever. Moving on to our other big trade acquisition, Trevor Story. He also had some good progression throughout the season. He got a decent amount to that contact against both sides, the power against lefties. He's going to be unbelievable against lefties, but he's up to a 93 overall now. When we look at his stats, and dude put up probably almost an MVP contending season. I don't know if he's quite there, because I feel like there were a couple of guys that were having crazy years. And even though I haven't done too well with him, I know I will, right? I mean, it's Trevor's story. You can't suck with the guy that much. And even though I wasn't doing good, he still was doing really good since we traded for him. I think he actually improved, even though we didn't get any pluses with him. We didn't give him any boost when I player locked with him. He still ended up doing better than he was doing before he got traded to us, I think. But he hit 33 homers, but he had the most hits in his career. 35 doubles, 7 triples. He also started drawing a lot of walks this year. That on base almost got up to 400. Cut down on the strikeouts. He was stealing bases. Again, I wish it didn't come with 13 times caught. But yeah, that OPS, 967. Almost getting up to that 1000 OPS. You'd have to be in the MVP conversation at that point. 5.7 WAR. I never know what goes into WAR, man. I never know how it's calculated, but apparently this is his 3rd best season when it comes to wins above replacement. But I don't really know. I wish I understood, because I feel like more walks, less strikeouts, a higher OPS. Shouldn't that translate into a better WAR? I don't know. I just don't get it. Still a really good WAR season though. All right, and finally on to our own guys, our homegrown guys. Starting with Kris Bryant. He actually ended up going down in overall by the end of the year, which is crazy because he had a good year. He didn't quite sustain it all the way to the end, but he definitely had a bounce back year, especially from 2020. But he was one of our better players throughout. 29 bombs, drove in 101 runs, drew a lot of walks, 4 triples too with 30 doubles. His on base ended up right near 400. Batting average couldn't quite make it over 300. OPS over 900. That WAR is going to be not as good as I thought, but 4.6. Then on to Ian Happ. Oh my gosh, Ian Happ, dude. What a year from him. We got that 2 home run game with him in his player lock to give him a 3+ boost for the rest of the year, and man, did that pay off. That A potential mixed with how good of a season he had, he got a ton of progression. Plus 10 to the power versus righties, plus 9 to his contact versus lefties. His contact is over 60 against both sides. That's not even really a weakness anymore. I had also noticed his fielding is high enough that he's a bronze fielding badge in a secondary position, so that's good. The discipline at 97. We'll see how that paid off. But he hit 42 bombs. I wish I could see the splits, because for so much of the year, he hit like all but 1 home run against righties, and then I hit 1 against lefties with them. But I don't know what the final number was. I would assume, looking at this, since he went up a ton against righties in power, but none against lefties, probably hit the vast majority of these against righties. 95 walks drawn. That's where that discipline comes in. He almost cracked 100 walks, finishing with an on base of 381. Who cares about, I don't know. I actually don't know what point I was trying to make, but who cares about the batting average being in the 260s when the on base is up at 381? And then the slugging where it's at, OPS over 900 for the first time in his career. They don't have too many like advanced fielding metrics in the game, but only 5 errors with his fielding. That's pretty solid. That translates to a 6.9 WAR, man. Almost a 7 WAR for this guy. What a season for Ian Happ, man. Oh my god. That makes me so happy too, because I wasn't sure at the beginning. He was one of the guys I was unsure about what his contributions were going to be, but he ended up becoming much better than I even thought he could. Now on to Baez. And man, he had a good year of progression too. That fielding went up to a 93. The hitting went up across the board except for against lefties, but like the rest of his numbers went up a lot. So he ends up at an 89 in the stats. I mean, I would say this season of Baez was what you would have expected out of Baez after 19 and 18. I mean, a few more homers this year, but a few less doubles. Drove in a lot of runs, 121. He was like in the league lead for a lot of the year. Still struck out a bunch, didn't draw a ton of walks, so the on base wasn't too impressive. But the slugging was, I mean, you can't say he's not good. The OPS at 850. So obviously you wish he would draw a few more walks. But I don't know. We've got so many on-base guys that I don't really care, especially if he's going to hit 38 home runs in this season. But that translates to a wins above replacement of 4.2, just behind his 2018 season. Now over to Jock Peterson. Another impressive season from a guy that I was not sure about what we were going to get out of him. But his Power against righties, his went all the way up to a 99. Haps stopped at a 98, but Jock didn't stop. Max power against righties. He also gained a lot against lefties. It's still not that great, but better than what he was at, obviously. The discipline went way up. He's a solid fielder. He's one fielding attribute away from being a silver fielder and left. And the stats don't lie, man. I mean, kind of like Baez, if you take out this 2020 year, it pretty much fit in with this 2019 season. It's almost identical. But he hit 34 homers, drew a bunch of walks. The on base almost 100 points higher than the average. The slugging way up there. I mean, this is not a guy who was supposed to have a good year. He was just not supposed to be good at all. He wasn't even supposed to start, but he ended up starting for the entire year, basically. Even against lefties for a stretch of time. But a 3.3 WAR on him, that's actually his second best. I would have assumed this was his best season as long as 2019 wasn't, but apparently it's not. Over to Willson Contreras, the highest overall player when we started things out, and he got up to a 91. He pretty much progressed across the boards except for the running numbers and the power against righties. His season ended up being better than it seemed like it was shaping out to be, so he must have made a late season surge. So he's hot going into the postseason. That's good. But he finishes with 20 homers, 25 doubles. He should not be trying to steal bases, but that on base, again, like 100 points higher than average, OPS of 819. I'm sure he played a great catcher behind the plate. That translates to a 4.7 WAR, which is actually by far his best. Then Jason Heyward. Oh my god, Jason Heyward. I was not looking forward to Jason Heyward when I booted up this March to October. Like, I was thinking, alright, one of our first targets is going to be outfield. We're going to replace Jason Heyward, and then life's going to be good after that. But dude, Heyward turned in a season. At 31 and a C potential, he didn't regress. I mean, he did regress in a bunch of stats, but he made up for it by actually progressing in contact and power versus righties. And look at this season he turned in. 18 home runs, 20 doubles, more walks than strikeouts. So that gives him an on base of 390, OPS of 869, almost batted over 300. His WAR is 3.6. That's gotta be, yeah, that's tied for his best season ever, going all the way back to his pre-Cubs days. And man, if you could just not have him bat against lefties ever, his numbers would probably look even better. He'd probably have like a 320 average, 450 on base, who knows. And then we come to Rizzo here. And Rizzo, man, he was the only guy I could probably say in this entire team that I'd consider a disappointment. There's a couple other guys throughout the team that didn't have great seasons. The two that come to mind are MARISNICK and Adbert. But like, neither of them I had high expectations for, but Rizzo I did, and he let me down. He ended up going down a few overall. I think he started at an 84. And I mean, you look at his on base, all right, compared to the average, and 76 walks. That part of his game was good. That part of his game was real good, drawing a lot of walks, getting on base a lot. He even, I don't know why he's trying to steal 15 times, but he even turned in a really good stolen base percentage. The problem comes with the slugging. Only 13 doubles, 12 homers. The slugging percentage didn't even crack 400, so his OPS is only around 750. I mean, we'll see it once we get to him, but like, Anthony Rizzo should not have a lower slugging percentage than Nico Hoerner. That part of it is a disappointment. Still had a WAR of 2.1. So I don't know, man. You could make the argument that he did okay, but for the type of player you expect Rizzo to be, and at first base, you gotta slug a higher number. And I still think going into the postseason, I'm gonna stick with this lineup that I had set after trading for Trey Turner, where we have Rizzo coming off the bench and leaving Peterson and Heyward in the starting lineup, because they're just so good, especially against righties. And Rizzo is he's just not that impressive. All right, but let's talk about our bench now. First guy off the bench right now is Jake Marisnick. I don't know how he went up 2 in his contact numbers, but this guy stunk. And I had somewhat high hopes. Like I said earlier, I didn't have high expectations, but I kind of had hopes. Hopes and expectations are different. But I kind of was looking at him, it's like, oh, his hitting numbers aren't like, you know, abysmal. They're okay. High speed and high fielding. I thought this guy was going to do all right, and he just did not. Only the 1 homer throughout the year, 12 doubles. I don't know, the average at 219. On base didn't even crack 300. Slugging barely cracked 300 for a 601 OPS. He didn't make an error though in the field, so at least there's that part of his game that he can come into center field, or I guess anywhere in the outfield, and play a good position. So probably on the merits of his fielding alone, he finished with a positive WAR. But it'd be interesting if they could break it down between like defensive WAR and offensive WAR. But looking at this makes me wish that we could have chosen to stick with Brennen Davis, because like Davis is probably playing just as good, if not better, of an outfield as Marisnick. But Davis had that really high contact that I would have loved to have on this team. Then we come to ROMINE, and I can't be upset with ROMINE, even though he didn't finish with a super impressive year. That like entire first half, he was going off as a backup catcher. His average was at like 340. On base was over 400. It obviously didn't stay that way. His numbers definitely fell back. But I don't know, man. I feel like you can't get upset. He's a backup catcher. He's only there to play when Contreras needs an off day. And I can't even say he did bad. I mean, I feel like backup catchers are like the least expected to perform at the plate. I just feel like that's a thing around the MLB. Backup catchers are usually always there for their glove and like nothing else. So I don't even know what he did defensively at catcher, but I can't be upset with a backup catcher not hitting a crazy high number. But I mean, dude is 32. See potential. He progressed. He went from a 73 to a 74. So you can't be mad with it. And what did he finish with in terms of WAR? 0.6. That's better than Marisnick. I'll take it. Then on to Nico Hoerner. He finishes at an 83 overall. I can't remember if he started at a 78 or 79, but he progressed pretty nicely. Pretty uniform improvements across the board. So he's still not an amazing hitter in this, but his fielding is a diamond. He's got good speed. He ends up with 7 homers, 3 triples, 16 doubles. Like I said, higher slugging than Rizzo ended up with. And actually, he probably had a better all-around season than Rizzo. He didn't play quite as much, but like, it's not like the on-base was a ton lower than Rizzo's. And then the slugging was higher, the OPS is higher. He had a 3-win season, only made 1 error in the field. Nico Hoerner is definitely a good piece, and if this was a March to October that had multiple seasons, he would be fun to hang on to for a couple more years. And then finally, when it comes to hitting, we go to David Bodie, who ended up, I think, having a decent year, even though he was not playing well at the beginning. But he also pretty uniform improvements across the board. He ends up being pretty solid against righties, actually, and solid fielding, good arm. But yeah, again, you can't really be too upset with these numbers, especially from where he was at and what it seemed like he was doing. But he ends up with a 355 on base, 14 doubles, better slugging than Rizzo, better OPS than Rizzo, 0.9 WAR. So does that mean everybody finished with a positive WAR? That's good. All right, man, and I just glanced over at how long I've been recording, and I do. Every time I get too carried away with this. This is going to be a stupid long episode, but we still have the pitching to go through. Kyle Hendricks, our ace, did not improve, which is weird. He had such a good year. I know he's 31, but we had guys that were the same age and his C potential get better. But Hendricks at a B potential didn't get any better. But he had an amazing year. 223 and 2/3 innings pitched at a 2.49 ERA. Didn't strike out many guys, and we'll see that across the board in our starting rotation. We actually had, I don't even know if it's old school, but it feels old school. But like, just a quick glance at everybody, none of our guys have a really high velocity. Like Fulmer's fastballs, they get up to 93. ARRIETA's sinker gets up to 92. We got 92 on Trevor Williams' fastball, 88 on Davies, and then Hendricks 87. So like, we don't have any starters that throw hard. None of them got a high number of strikeouts, but they all turned in really good seasons. Like I said, I don't know if that's old-fashioned or old school, but it feels like it is. Hendricks had 5 complete games, 27 quality starts out of 32 total starts. Wins above replacement of 3.9, 9. It's fun to see Kyle Hendricks having a good year. I've always liked Kyle Hendricks. I've always wanted him to do good. And then on to another trade acquisition for us. Michael Fulmer, we got him from the Tigers pretty early on, actually. He ends up going up to an 84 by the end of the year. Pretty good progression. And wow, I didn't even notice this. He had 21 wins. Why did he have 34 starts and Hendricks only had 32? Must have been something with the point in time that he was traded. Maybe he got a couple extra starts or something, but he ends up tossing 240 innings. So on the sheer volume of innings alone, he was able to crack 200 strikeouts. But he finishes with an under 3 ERA, 2.88, 25 quality starts, 5 complete games, 4 of them shutouts. He gets a higher WAR actually than Hendricks. That's interesting. 4.8 for him on the year. Easily his best season of his career. Then we move on to Zach Davies. Who would have thought he would have had a good year, but man, did he. Finishes with 19 wins, almost got that 20 mark. 226 innings pitched. He was flirting with a sub 3 ERA for a lot of the year, but he finishes at 319, which is still good. 167 strikeouts, the whip at 1.06, 6 complete games, one of them being a shutout, 4.1 WAR, so he also had a higher WAR than Hendricks. I never understand what goes into that. Then on to Trevor Williams. Talk about someone I didn't expect to be good. I had absolutely no expectations for Trevor Williams. Like I never even looked at him and gave a single thought to him at the beginning of this thing. The only thought I had was, okay, we got to improve this starting rotation. We'll trade for a starter, which would probably mean we would no longer have Trevor Williams. But we never did that. We never got rid of Trevor Williams. He started this whole season, ends with 20 wins on 32 starts. He improved across the board in his attributes, tossed 220 innings, only 148 strikeouts, so he was not a strikeout guy, but that ERA finishes right around 3. He did give up quite a few home runs though. I didn't notice that. 33 home runs. That's not super ideal. But the whip down at 1.08, he had 2 complete games, both of them shutouts. Only a 1.5 WAR. And yeah, I kind of, once I realized how many home runs he gave up, I kind of thought this FIP would be a little high, and I think WAR is based on FIP. So maybe the more we dig into it, maybe a fake good season from Trevor Williams. But hey, as long as it's a good season, we only care about the one season. We don't care about he's going to regress to the mean next year. As long as he has a good year this year, that's all we care about. And then lastly, we come to Arrieta. He did regress by 1 overall, but he's 35. He should have regressed by more, so good on him for that. And he ended up with a good year too. It seems like he must have fallen off a little bit near the end, because I feel like his ERA was just like the other guys, like right in the low 3s. He finishes with a 3.55 ERA, but he still got 16 wins through 210 innings, struck out 167. The whip was at 1.17. He still managed to throw 2 complete games. He had a 3.4 WAR. So I mean, like I said, our starting rotation was so similar in how they pitched. 1 through 5, all righties, all soft tossing for the most part. High volume of innings, low strikeouts comparatively. I don't know, it's just funny to me that this rotation of guys did so well. But then we move on to the bullpen. We got Adbert, and we know it's well documented what kind of season he's had, but it should be different now. For the whole first part of the season, he was a mid-70s overall guy. He was not good. We see he got 10 starts throughout the year. I think 9 of them came at the beginning, and then I moved him to the bullpen. But yeah, I mean, 5.57 ERA, 50 walks, that's way too high. He does finish with a positive WAR though, but the thing is that we just called him back up, but with that call up we got him a +4 to his attributes, and now he's progressed 1 more, so he's honestly a completely different pitcher now, and I think I could feel all right turning to him in the postseason here with where his numbers are at now. David Price was our first trade we made of the season, and he ended up being a pretty solid one. He did regress a little bit. He finishes at a 75, but look at the season he had. 3.24 ERA is what he ended up with. Remember when we traded for him? That ERA I think was in the 5s, maybe even the 6s. So he turned things around once we traded for him. Tossed 66 2/3 innings, struck out 54, 3.24 ERA. I mean, I don't know. I don't know how that only finishes with a 1 WAR. I guess the FIP was kind of high, but I'd love to see the breakdown between before we got him and after we got him. I feel like he was even better for us specifically. Dan Winkler, I feel like we didn't talk too much about him, but he was more in the long relief role. 29 2/3 innings pitched. I feel like that's what you're going to see here, is since our starters ate up so many innings, our relievers aren't going to have like crazy amount of innings pitched. But they all had their role, and Winkler filled his role pretty good. Only a 3.03 ERA, 1.18 WHIP, has a positive 0.3 WAR. He was another guy I didn't really have any sort of expectations going into the year. I was just hoping he turned in a solid year in the bullpen, and I'd say he did slightly better than solid. Rowan Wick, kind of the same thing. I didn't really have much expectation for him specifically. He barely pitched though. He didn't get a whole lot of work. Still finishes with a 3.45 ERA. I remember he was struggling near the beginning. I don't know. There's really not much to say about him. He finishes positive in the WAR. The one good thing about him, I don't know if it'll factor into the playoffs really at all, but if we need him to, he can be an emergency catcher. Ryan TEPERA. Oh my God. Ryan TEPERA fits into the Jason Hayward, I guess Jock Peterson, Trevor Williams category. And throw in Zach Davies while you're in there too, why not? But Ryan TEPERA had an amazing year, maybe even better than all those guys I just listed. I felt the need to point out age and potential earlier when talking about a few other players. Ryan TEPERA was the oldest of them all. 33 years old at a C potential, dude went up 4. He went from a 72 to a 76 at 33 with a C potential. He threw 53 2/3 innings. I'm glad the game recognized that he was so good and kept giving him innings. Only gave up 3 homers, only walked 14 guys. The ERA finished at 1.34 with an under 1 WHIP, a 0.91 WHIP. Finishes with a 1.2 WAR, which, you know, relief pitching isn't the spot to accumulate WAR, so over 1 WAR for a reliever, that's got to be something. That's got to be good. But dude, I could not be any happier with Ryan TEPERA's year. Brandon Workman, another guy I really didn't have expectation with. I didn't even use him until like the very end of the season. He turned in a really good year too. He actually had a lot of innings pitched compared to some other guys, and he kind of bucked the trend of a low strikeout to walk ratio. He actually had 64 strikeouts and 49 1/3. Finishes with a 3.10 ERA. The WHIP was solid here, 0.9 WAR. Definitely a guy, especially after I finally used him once in a game and he was good. Definitely a guy I wouldn't hesitate turning to. Now we move to KIMBREL. I had so many doubts going into this year with KIMBREL, and most of it stemmed from that low walks per 9. I was really worried about his control, but he turned in a really good year too. A really good year. One of his best years, and that's KIMBREL. I probably could have had him in the closer role, and it would have been fine, but you know, once we see who was our closer, there probably would have been no reason to change it up. They fit their roles really well. KIMBREL fit his role really well. 34 holds, 37 innings. He only walked 16. That was my big concern. He didn't strike out as many as I maybe would have hoped, but a 1.7 ERA. That is a return to form for Craig KIMBREL. That is back to his Braves days. The WHIP rate at 1.6 WAR. Again, I could not be happier with the season he turned in. And then that brings us to Andrew Chafin. I didn't even realize this, but he went up to a B potential. He was a C potential. He is now up to a B. He's an 80 overall, and he finishes with, man, if he doesn't win reliever of the year, then somebody else must have been insane, and I'm going to be afraid if we face him in the playoffs. But he has 44 saves, 5 blown, so that's 49 of his 50 appearances came in saved situations. So almost every single one of his appearances, he had to pick up the save. And even in those 5 blown saves, I didn't even realize this, but in those 5 blown saves, we still must have won 4 of those 5 games because he only has 1 loss. B threw 49 1/3 innings, 58 strikeouts, only walked 9 guys, only gave up 2 homers, only gave up 8 runs, 1.46 ERA, 0.97 WHIP, 1.5 WAR out of the bullpen, 1.84 FIP. But guys, as my recording just now crosses the 1 hour mark, first, I apologize. Once again, I got carried away. But second, that brings us to the end of this episode, this stat recap, this beast of an episode. In the next one, we will start this postseason journey. I don't know exactly how I want to go about taking down these episodes, because we're winding down here, man. There is only a week to go before 22 comes out, and we have to finish this in the span of that week. And if I remember my Brewers March to October right, I think I had 12 episodes in the playoffs alone, and we can't do that. We got to fit it into like 6. So again, I don't know exactly how that's going to work. I don't know how I'm going to format it, but I'm probably going to play slightly more per episode than I would have in the Brewers one. We might see some longer duration episodes, but at the end of the day, we're going to get this done before 22 comes out, and we're going to win the World Series again. So guys, if you made it this far, which I doubt anybody did, but if you did, make sure you hit that like button for me. If you're not subscribed to the channel, I especially don't know how you made it this far. If this is like the first video of mine you're watching, why watch this far? Watch one of my other ones. So hit that subscribe button so that you don't miss the other episodes, the other videos I make, especially going into 22. I'm so excited for 22. We're gonna have so much content. But guys, that does it for me in this one. Again, thanks for watching. I hope everyone enjoyed, and I will see you next time for the start of the postseason.